right, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Ridge Talk. I am Pastor Justin. We got Sean here, Daniel as well. I think it's been 2 or 3 weeks now since we've been able to record an episode of Ridge Talk here. And so feel free to like the podcast, subscribe. Every time a new post comes out, you will receive an email for that. The information's there on the bottom of the screen. And let me just give an introduction as to what we're going to talk about today. First, we have a quick question that I'll read and we'll answer briefly. And then we're going to just dive into what Pastor Luch talked about a little bit this past Sunday as well regarding a rule of life and what that is and some things that each of us put into place that we know is helpful for our own growth. So first, the question that we received this week, we had just a real brief question. Somebody mentioned that Luch noted during the message that having a mentor, spiritual mentor would be a good thing to have, which I would agree with. I've had different ministry mentors through the years. But they just indicated, hey, the men's Bible study that you guys have is really early, 6 a.m. on a Thursday. And that's not a good time for me, which I would agree with that. It's not a good time for me either. But they said, hey, do you have anything else that is happening in the evenings that I could connect with? And so I feel like there's two questions in that. One of those questions is, this person might be looking for a group. I don't have their name. So if you're looking for a community group of some kind or another Bible study or something like that, we do have community groups that are meeting throughout the week. Many of them meet Sunday evenings, but we do have other ones through the week as well. And we have a young adult group that is meeting occasionally as well. If you're looking to connect with a group, I would be the person to get in touch with for that. I oversee the groups, so I can do what I can to help you get connected. But also, there was the question of, hey, can I, where do I go to find a mentor? Somebody who I can meet with more consistently just to focus on some specific things in my life. And I think all of us kind of do that with people at different times in their walk in the faith. And, those are things where, hey, feel free to reach out to us. We'd be happy to, schedule coffee, breakfast, lunch, something like that to meet with you. The reality is that, we all have families. So our schedules are not as flexible as some other people's schedules. But we're always happy to meet with people just to talk about, hey, how can I grow in my faith? How can I grow in my relationship with God? How can I improve in these other relationships in life? We're always willing to have those kind of conversations.
Yeah, that's right. And that's just such a complex question because season of life and like all the other factors in life really go at play. I think about all the guys that are in that 6 a.m. study, and it's either they're just kind of early risers who've been early rising now for 40 years or something like that, or I think like you mentioned, family men, like people who have got kids at home. Oftentimes it's hard for them to give away or give up an evening, and so 6 a.m. is like, well, I can't do it during work hours, and I can't do it during family hours. This is the time I have. But I think the guy said as a young adult. Well, yeah, young adults. I remember being a young adult. I only wanted to do things at night. I didn't want to be up before 9 a.m., And so it's just interesting. And so I think finding what works for you in the season of life that you're in is kind of an important thing. But,
So again, feel free to reach out to us and we will try to help you connect with one of us or with a group any way we can.
Yeah, I agree with all that.
So, Luch talked about a rule of life on Sunday morning, and that's language that it was used in the early church. I mean, back in like 300s AD, I believe. And basically a rule of life is a set of practices that you put into place in order to grow in your relationship with God and others. And the language is becoming more common again in churches these days, whether that is from Peter Scazzero with the Emotionally Healthy Discipleship material, as well as Practicing the Way, new book by John Mark Comer. I think we mentioned the book before, and now all three of us have listened to the book or read through the book. To just get an idea as to John Mark Comer's ideas and strategy with all of that. So yeah, plug for the book. This episode is not brought to you by Practicing the Way, but we have all read it and really enjoyed it.
I'm being loud over here. I'm sorry, but
thank you, Sean, for putting a mint in your mouth halfway through the episode here. But it's all good.
Getting over sinus.
Yeah, it's all good. But so Luke's just mentioned some things on Sunday morning that he does to grow in the faith. So these aren't always things that are practical for everybody, but he's like, hey, here are things that I do in my own growth. And we just thought we would take the opportunity to share, hey, what are some things that we incorporate in our lives for our own spiritual growth?
Yeah, so if I can jump in here, maybe just to further clarify language just before we jump in, that idea of a rule of life, like we don't really respond in our culture necessarily well to the idea of a set of rules.
Yeah.
And then within Christianity, we have the ideas of, is Christianity following a set of rules that are prescribed for us, and is that how we live out, our religion, or is it a relationship with Jesus, or what is Christianity? And there's all these different ideas that people posit for that, or misconceptions that people draw from that. What we're not saying is that these are the set of rules, or this is a rule that you must follow in order to be saved or to be a Christian. The language really comes from the ancient world of vineyards, and the idea of a trellis that is set up for grapes to grow on. If you guys have ever been to wine country or anything like that, it is the structure that is in place to allow growth to happen in a healthy way. And then ultimately the imagery that's used over and over again by Jesus and by other writers, especially in the New Testament, is bearing fruit. Yeah. That a sign of health is that things are happening in your life that bear witness to your relationship with Jesus. And so what we're talking about with the rule of life is it is the structure put in place so that your relationship with Jesus can flourish. And then there are a number of things. You said something yesterday, Daniel, that I loved. When we start talking about, okay, what does a relationship with Jesus look like? It is this mix of personal growth. I think you said something along the lines of transformation is not transformation unless it's also working outward. So it's this idea of it's personal growth and personal development with Jesus, but it's also development and growth towards serving other people. And so when we talk about why would we even think about putting practices in, it's not to earn more favor with God.
Right.
It's not to like check off a progress chart. It's not about improving ourselves. It's about growing in depth with Jesus. That benefits us, but it's also so that we can participate in his kingdom in the world and kind of look how we can become more like Jesus to the world around us. And so when we talk about those practices, it really starts with, first, how do we relate with Jesus? John Mark uses this paradigm that be with Jesus, become like Jesus, do what Jesus did if he were you in your context.
Yeah.
And so it really starts with the idea of what are the things that I'm putting into place in my life that are allowing me to be with Jesus in a greater way and in a more consistent way. For me right now, that's where I'm trying to focus the most.
Yeah.
Because I do think that it is in some ways sequential. You're not going to be able to become like Jesus, and you're not going to be able to do the things that Jesus would do if he were alive today without being with Jesus first and having that relational connection first. And so I do think that these things build on one another.
Yeah.
And so right now, even as, someone who's 38 years old, I've born into a Christian family, been a pastor, been in vocational ministry, all these things. I'm still looking at my life and going, I can be better at being with Jesus, so that in my attempts of doing these things for Jesus and in his kingdom, that's coming from the right place.
Yeah.
The first place that I'm starting is contemplative prayer. That is probably a whole other set of like spooky language there. For me, it's just to be able to stop and still myself from the busyness of the world, from constantly having inputs, information coming in. It's going to God in prayer in a way that's not starting from a place of, hey, God, here's what I need, or here's what I'd like you to do, or here's what so-and-so is going through that I want to bring before you. I certainly do have that aspect to my prayer life. But it's the part of a relationship, just like in a human relationship. We're all married. There are times where you're just present with your spouse, right? It's not even necessarily that a conversation is taking place, but you're just in the room.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You're doing something together. One of my favorite things to do with my wife is just like regular errands. I love like going grocery shopping and that kind of stuff. Just spending that time. We're not always filling that with conversation, right? But it does there's something about that connection. And so for me, I find that it is so helpful to try to begin my day with that connection and giving God an opportunity to speak to me, to be present, to listen to him.
Yeah, I think John Mark Comer mentioned like 4 different types of prayer.
Yeah.
In the book. One of them is, saying things to God, and those are pre-written prayers, liturgy, songs, praying through the Psalms, something like that, where it's already pre-written, you're just reading it out loud or singing it out loud. And then you have, so that's praying to God. Talking with God is... hey, I'm just sharing information about my day, what's happening in my life, and really asking God for specific things. Mm-hmm. It's like prayers of petition. God, can you answer these prayers in my life? And then you go to different types of prayer of like, number 3 was listening to God, where it's like, hey, I'm not going to sit and talk the entire time. I'm going to try to listen for the voice of God. And then what exactly was the 4th one that he mentioned? But it was just being with God.
It's a dangerous game you're playing. I remember the four things in a row.
I'm also reading another book on prayer right now, so I'm trying not to conflate.
But I think it was just being with God, and that's the back and forth of listening and just enjoying that time with one another. And
Confession, would have been the other one actually. I think. Maybe that's the other book I'm reading.
Yeah, I think that's the other book you're reading. But it doesn't matter. The point is, for many of us, when we think of prayer, we think of petition. Yeah. God, can you do these things for me? And sadly, a lot of that is asking God to fulfill our will instead of listening for what is your will in our lives. So, so contemplative prayer is that level 3, level 4. I'm going to listen to God, and I'm just going to enjoy being with God.
Yeah, and it's the idea of seeing God clearly. When you're approaching God to pray, like I can get into the whole thing about the Lord's Prayer. It starts with Our Father. Looking at God and seeing him for who he is. That the first thing that you're identifying is he's a loving Father. I'm his beloved Son. And I start from that place. And then everything else, whether it be a petition, whether it be something that I'm hopeful for, whether it be something that I'm grieving, it is coming from that place of first recognizing I'm here with someone who loves me completely and fully. And I think having an accurate view of who God is helps shape those other things.
And who
it
you
also,
are to him.
And then you start talking about going out into the world and being with other people, right?
Right.
Like I was that way this morning, to be honest. I mean, I didn't sleep super well. I've been kind of sick the last few days. I started off and I was like, I had to stop this morning and take a minute and go, God, I am grumpy. And we had staff meeting this morning, and I'm about to go be with a bunch of people, and I don't want to bring my grumpy self to them this morning. And so would you just help me to stop and see things clearly and see you clearly? And move forward?
you mentioned like the first thing you do is really get into that mindset of, who am I to God? I am somebody who is completely loved. I am a child of God. This is a very safe and open and welcoming place for me to sit in the presence of God. And then you're able to do that more.
Yeah.
Or do it well. And I know, different people try to enter into prayer like that in different ways. There are the different denomination or groups of Christianity where, you light a candle before you pray. And it's not that your prayer has more weight or more power to it because you lit a candle, but it is just that, no, I'm going to, this gives me some kind of physical act to do in the moment of prayer that's going to draw me closer to God. People do different things, and there isn't a prescribed, this is the way you have to do it. But getting into the mindset of contemplative prayer is a very good practice.
Yeah.
For me, man, so I'll just say this. I think having finished the book, anytime we talk about a book or an author, that doesn't ever mean that we're 100% in agreement with the author or all the things they're doing. But by the time I finished the book, I found it to be an incredibly helpful resource, and one that I would recommend to people with maybe one or two caveats. But for me, I just want to offer some takeaways from the book and how I've seen that kind of infiltrating my life. One is his insistence pretty early on that, hey, there's not really a distinction in the Bible between belief and practice. That, we can in the West be very Cartesian, right? Like we're just heads on a stick, and like it's all about what we believe, and often our denominations even,
Thank you for using the word Cartesian.
Yeah, it's one of my new favorite words. It's made its way in my vocabulary, but but it is this idea that like we divide ourselves based on what we think what we believe, and not on what we practice. And he's like, well, that's a false dichotomy when it comes to being a follower of Jesus, because it's not just about like believing what he says; it's about following him and doing what he did. And I think that was a really helpful corrective, because I think I can tend, just by use of the word Cartesian, like I tend to like orient myself and lean towards just thinking and belief. And I thought that was just a helpful corrective, something that needs to be said in all of Christianity, but in my heart, it was a good thing. You talking about the trellis, the second thing I thought was really helpful. He had a significant amount of time spent on that concept of abiding. Jesus says, "Abide in me." And I'm the vine, you're the branches. Apart from me, you can do nothing. And so this idea of the trellis in the early church really was, he even said this, it was the natural outworking of that teaching. They're just bringing it to its logical conclusion that, okay, I need to be attached to the vine, but if there's not structure to how I'm doing this, I'm going to rot on the ground, or I'm vulnerable to, animals coming at you. They're bringing the illustration to its logical conclusion. Yeah. And so that idea of abiding, like really and it's connected to that idea of contemplative prayer, that I think it's so easy for us to like go throughout a whole day and we're not really continually purposefully trying to draw our attention back to God and like orient our lives around him. And so that idea of abiding was a really helpful one for me. And then I think a third one would be, and it's so important to say this, because I think here's why I think all this is important, why we're talking about it right now, is, we have this counter formation series that's coming up, and we also are thinking about not just counterformation but formation. And this is resonating with us right now. He's like, you're always being formed by something. Like, that's the recognition. You're already following something. There's something shaping your life already. We need to name that and say, well, is that God or not? Is that am I being formed into the image of Christ or into the image of
something
else in my world? And I thought that was really good. And if you kind of get off kilter, you become malformed, right? You're being formed in a way that's not in the image of Christ. And so one of the things he talked about that I thought was really helpful, especially in pertaining to the concept or the conversation about discipleship, that we use that word a lot. He doesn't use that word. He uses the word apprentice. But the measure of maturity. He talks very clearly that the measure of maturity for a Christian, the scriptures are clear. There's not ambiguity on this. It's love. Mm-hmm. Are you a person of love, and are the things that you're doing forming you into a more loving person? Mm-hmm. And I was like, that's so necessary. It needed to be said, and it's been helpful in my own life because I think we can make the measure of maturity knowledge. How much do we know about the Bible? Or we can make the measure of maturity our discipline. How disciplined are we to read the Bible or to pray? Or the measure of maturity is service. How frequently are we serving? How well are we serving? How generous are we? And he's like, it's love. And now love can look like those things, but love. Are you a loving person? I know a lot of people who think they are mature Christians who are not loving people.
Yeah.
And I think that was a helpful corrective, like to say that out loud and then to help me frame it in that way. Just, are you doing the things that are making you a more loving person?
Yeah. Well, it's like love should be the motivating factor for all those other things that you mentioned. Why would I be in prayer regularly and be in God's word? Because of my great love for him.
That's right.
And recognizing that he loves me. And in a loving relationship, you spend time engaging with the other, right?
And why am I generous? Why am I serving?
It's
because I love. The love of God is in me. And that idea of, but you have to be connected to the vine. That really is and I think you said this earlier, it's the rules are not about how we gain favor with God. We've already got the favor of God through our connection with Christ. These are just the things that allow us to flourish.
Yeah, that rule idea is like a straight line.
Yeah.
It's the thing that keeps you moving toward the thing that you want to become.
Yeah, that's right. And so I just felt like those were really, really helpful things. I'll say one more thing. The one more thing that's been very helpful in this book for me, and that I've tried to be practicing, it was a weight off my shoulders. I'll just say that. He spent a significant amount of time talking about, or just returning to the idea of whatever this is, whatever this rule of life, and I think he did a good job unpacking that. It's going to look different for you in different seasons of life. And, I feel guilty oftentimes that I haven't been praying for 2 hours a day. Right? Like I'm supposed to be one of the more mature Christians. I'm a pastor, and I'm supposed to, that means I have to pray a lot more than people. And if I'm not praying 2 hours a day, I must not be very mature, and God must, Yeah. And he's like, dude, are you kidding me? Like,
it's okay.
It's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay. God sees everything you're doing. He sees where you are in life. And so really, it's probably impacted more than anything my prayer life. Because I'm trying to, in the small moments, in the silent moments, in the moments when I'm between things, intentionally and purposefully bring my attention back into conversation with God. Mm-hmm. And saying it, and that's not inadequate. And I'm not a failure for only doing it in that way. And so
I've got a lot of thoughts in this whole conversation, and probably won't be able to share all of them. I think, the most important points that we want to communicate here is that this language for rule of life is language that we're probably going to adopt more of in the weeks and years to come here at the church. And we're even in early conversation, like very early conversation. Like, hey, what would a rule of life look like for us as pastors What would one look like for members of the staff, and what would a rule of life look like for members at the church, even?
Yeah.
And just beginning to prayerfully discern, like, hey, what are some things? And again, not to create law, but to say, hey, this is just going to help us be more fruitful as God's people. And another thought that I had too is, people who craft out a rule of life, and I mean, there are books out there on the process to go through for this, exercises to walk through to draft out a rule of life. People who outline a rule of life and find that it's easy to follow haven't crafted out a good rule of life. Because apprenticing Jesus, becoming more like Jesus, is not easy. And so when you do have a rule of life, it isn't supposed to be easy. But you keep taking steps in that direction. I know, John Mark Comer mentioned in the book that he has his coffee with Jesus every morning for an hour, contemplative prayer and scripture reading with God for an hour every morning. And he's like, hey, if you're not there, that's okay. Start with 5 minutes. It's okay. You're not a bad person. And if you try to jump in and just, I'm going to practice contemplative prayer for an hour, your mind's going to go in 100 different directions. And that's okay. That's 100 more times to come back to Jesus. But start small and keep building up.
Yeah, and he readily admits there too. Like, that hour is still a constant struggle to keep coming back to Jesus. Your mind wanders.
It does wander.
What I love about that, he's not the only one that uses that concept, is the beautiful thing about like taking an hour or taking a longer period of time than what is actually sustainable. And instead of looking at the weakness of, oh, my mind wanders and I get off track, the phrase of like, those are opportunities to come back to Jesus, to purposely draw your attention back to the Lord. There's just something about that. Like, we all love, but the people that we're in relationship with, don't we like love to be acknowledged and seen? And sometimes it's not much more than that. Like, I love it. Like, the best things in life is when like you're going about your days and maybe something you're doing something small, and somebody that you're connected to sees it and acknowledges it, and you just feel seen. And then that's all the more like that interaction is, and then you move on, but it does something for you. I think that like there's that element of that with God. Like, so it is like, it's not that his hour is not the measure of, achievement.
That's right.
It's just, he's been able to carve out that opportunity for himself to go, I have an hour to keep just redirecting myself toward God. If you're a mom or dad of young kids, maybe that's 5 minutes, like legitimately. And that, great, do that, because that's a totally different thing.
I think, another aspect of the rule of life is, we've talked about abiding in Christ, getting to know God better, all of these kind of things. But there are other aspects to it as well. Like, there is that aspect of seeing yourself the way that God sees you, giving yourself a lot of grace. Self-love, self-care is not the same thing as self-centeredness. So people can add things into the rule of life of, hey, what are things I need to do to take care of myself? But it's also growing relationally with other people as well. So, there are people, I've seen other rules of life where Justin Earley, he's one of them, in his book, The Common Rule. He's like, hey, every day I have at least one meal with other people, every day. And he's a lawyer. It's like, I turn off my phone for 2 hours. I don't check my emails or texts or receive phone calls. And I enjoy a meal with other people. That's one way I can build relationships with them. Some people, I think Luch mentioned on Sunday, I have at least one Jesus conversation a week. I want to at least keep my faith vocal with at least one other person throughout the week. Some write down things on the rule of life, like I'm going to write one thank you card to somebody every week just to tell them I appreciate them. So there's lots of different things you can include in a rule of life. Luch mentioned just growing in the faith. He reads a book a week. And I was sitting in the back of the room looking around, and I could see some eyes getting really big. Like, dude, if I read a book in a year, that's crazy.
I was sitting right where you are sitting right now, and I'm like, that's not going to be on my list.
And I'm kind of with Luch. I usually finish 40 or 50 or 60 books in a year when I include audiobooks in with that. But when it comes specifically to my faith, I've been implementing a practice of I want to read at least one chapter of some kind of discipleship, spiritual formation, apprenticing in Jesus book a week. Like I want to read at least one chapter a week, and not just read it and be done, but read it and take in the principles. Look at all the questions the author is asking and internalize it like, oh, am I growing in this way? So those are the things I like to do. And, I know that you mentioned contemplative prayer, all of that. One thing that I have found works well for me through the years is the idea of journaling. And in general, I think I know more women who journal than men who journal. But I even have an app on my phone and computer that is a specific journaling app. And I write in it almost daily. But when I take the time to get out a notebook with pen and paper, my mind just slows down more. I think more about what I want to pray or what I want to write. It's more specific. I kind of have to drill down. Like I don't want to write for an hour, so let me drill down. What is it that's really there? So sometimes I just find that actually sitting down and writing out something is one way that helps me to slow down and connect with God better. So. Do you guys have anything else that you wanted to add into this?
I mean, there's a lot here. And one thing I just want to acknowledge generally is as we're having these conversations, we're starting to throw out some jargon and some terms that might be unfamiliar, that might even be overwhelming in a sense, because it's like, I feel like this can be a very insider conversation because we're all going, we just read the same book.
Right.
And we sort of now understand these terms and what they mean. Over time, we are hoping to continue to kind of bring these things to the surface and help there be a more general understanding amongst our staff, amongst the people in our church. So if you're watching this and you're kind of trying to wrap your head around some of this and you're hearing things, just know that like we're trying to start sprinkling this stuff in so that it gets more clear over time.
Yeah, and if you're if you're in a place where you're like, hey, I want to begin to explore this. I want to explore creating a rule of life. Here's the thing: is that whether it's John Mark Comer or Peter Scazzaro or Justin Earley, who wrote the Common Rule, or anybody else who talks about a rule of life, all of them note that it is a living, breathing document, that it is going to look different in different seasons of life, and that you might scratch something off in one season and add something else into it. So if you're into creating one, I know I've got some printouts of, hey, here's some questions to think through. Here's some ways to do that. I'm looking to, we talked yesterday about, hey, how do we want that to look? What do we want it to look like? We're just in those conversations. But if you want to talk with one of us, just as you're trying to wrestle through, hey, what are some things I can do to abide? How can I grow in my relationship with Jesus and others? How can I begin to see myself the way God sees me? And those are all good questions to wrestle with. And as we noted earlier, to the young person who indicated a desire for a mentor, reach out to us. I love having conversations about how to grow in my faith with others. So, yeah, anytime you want to reach out to us, reach out to us. I think that's all we have here today for this episode. We'll communicate more about this upcoming series that we have on counter formation and formation again in the future. And as always, if you have any questions, whether it's on the Colossians series, counter formation, how to grow in my relationship with Jesus, anything like that, feel free to send those in to us. The address there is on the bottom of the page. We'll gladly take those questions. If we can't answer them all, we'll try to at least answer individually. And we look forward to seeing you again for our next episode soon.
Yeah.